I never imagined my life could spiral so wildly out of control because of one person's twisted obsession. Just a few months ago, I was happily married, building a career, and looking forward to starting a family with my husband Marcus. We had been together for 5 wonderful years, meeting in college and falling deliriously in love. After graduation, Marcus landed a great job and I pursued my passion for photography. Life was picture perfect. That all shattered when Lilith entered the picture. Lilith was Marcus's cousin who had recently moved to our city. At first, I was excited to get to know her since she was new in town and Marcus's only close relative nearby. I insisted we take her out to dinner to welcome her. Big mistake. From the moment Lilith laid eyes on my husband, I could see the hunger in her gaze. She looked at him like a lioness eyeing her prey. Marcus seemed oblivious, delighted to have family in the area. But I picked up on Lilith's body language, the way she would lick her lips when he spoke, play with her hair, angle her body towards him. It made me deeply uncomfortable. After that first dinner, Lilith began inserting herself into our lives constantly. She would just drop by our apartment unannounced at all hours, make excuses to get Marcus alone by saying she needed man advice about something. She was always touching his arm during conversation, laughing overly loud at his jokes. I pointed it out to Marcus, but he brushed it off as my imagination. Things took an even more disturbing turn on Marcus's birthday. Lilith showed up at our place that evening wearing a tight red dress that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. When Marcus politely gave her a hug hello, she full-on groped him, sliding her hands down to cup his backside. I was horrified and Marcus quickly pushed her away, looking shocked. "Don't act so shy, cousin," Lilith purred. "That's just a down payment for your real birthday present later." She ran her tongue along her plump lips and winked. I immediately took Marcus aside and said we needed to cut her off after that disgusting display. But he felt sorry for her, saying she was just lonely having no other family in the city. He urged me to give her another chance, believing her behavior was just a desperate cry for attention. Well, her attention-seeking only escalated from there. Lilith started bombarding Marcus with extremely explicit texts and photos. I couldn't even look at his phone without feeling nauseous. She would call our apartment in the middle of the night, breathing heavily and moaning Marcus's name. I begged him to block her number and get a restraining order, but he was insistent on giving her one more chance to stop. Honestly, I was closer to divorcing Marcus than giving Lilith another chance. How could he be so blasé about his own cousin sexually harassing him like this? His passive reaction made me question everything about him and our relationship. I realized Marcus came from an extremely wealthy family that seemed to indulge Lilith's every whim, no matter how bratty or outrageous her behavior. Perhaps he was just naively expecting her inappropriateness to magically stop one day. Instead, Lilith's delusions of seducing my husband reached stratospheric heights. Lilith's deranged obsession with seducing Marcus soon turned into her demanding that we actually conceive a child together as a twisted gift for her upcoming 30th birthday. I'll never forget the night she showed up at our door, uninvited as always, and made this outrageous request with a straight face. "You have to get pregnant again and give me the baby," Lilith stated bluntly, brazenly letting herself into our apartment. I stared at her dumbfounded. "Excuse me? You cannot be serious." "I'm dead serious," she doubled down. "I'll be 30 soon and I want a baby of my own. But all the decent men are already taken." Her eyes hungrily raked over my husband's body. "Except for Marcus here, of course." Marcus's face drained of color. "Lilith, that's my wife you're talking about. And your own blood relative. This is absolutely psychotic." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Don't be so old-fashioned. We're all family here." "I'll just be the fun, hot aunt who dotes on the baby." Lilith traced a manicured fingernail along Marcus's jawline, making me feel ill. "Don't you want to put that strong seed of yours to good use for your favorite cousin?" I had to physically restrain myself from slapping her. How dare she make such a vulgar, entitled request? As if I was just an incubator for her perverted wishes. I grabbed Lilith by the shoulders and shoved her towards the door. "Get out of our home, you depraved lunatic. I don't ever want to see or hear from you again." But that was merely the start of Lilith's downward spiral into complete madness regarding her pursuit of our theoretical gift baby over the next several weeks. Lilith upped her twisted games. She would leave stuffed animals and baby items from expensive boutiques on our doorstep, attaching sickeningly suggestive notes about how wonderful a mother she would be. She constantly posted on social media about her burning desire to have a baby, vaguely hinting that I was cruelly denying her that dream. Some of Marcus's more gullible relatives even began reaching out to us, scolding me for supposedly denying Lilith access to our future children, as if we were breeders on a farm. I became enraged seeing their comments and messages, realizing Lilith had been painting me as some irrational, heartless villain to everyone. The final unraveling came when Lilith invited herself over under the guise of wanting to apologize for her prior behavior. Marcus and I naively allowed her in, assuming she had regained some semblance of sanity. But oh, were we terribly mistaken. Lilith launched into a long, nonsensical monologue about how having a baby would be the perfect cure for her boredom and loneliness. She claimed she was going to be a supermom who would smother our child with expensive gifts and affection. She even started lecturing us on potential baby names. I'm thinking Amanda for a girl, or maybe Jacob for a boy. She prattled on obliviously as Marcus and I stared at each other in horror. Definitely no plain names. My child deserves something refined and upper class. The sheer delusional entitlement of this woman. I had to repeatedly pinch myself to ensure I wasn't trapped in a nightmare. Marcus finally gathered his senses and utterly shut it down in the sternest possible terms. Lilith, stop this insanity right now! He boomed, his face beat red with anger in a way I'd never witnessed before. My wife is not your broodmare to produce children for your own amusement. Build your own damn family, the regular way, with someone else. Lilith instantly collapsed into loud, obnoxious sobs, begging and pleading with us to give her just one little baby. Marcus swiftly ushered the hysterical woman out of our home, making it clear she was permanently cut off from our lives going forward. After that blow-up, I hoped we had finally seen the last of Lilith's deranged antics. Marcus and I decided not to share the lurid details with his family, fearing they would make excuses for her behavior as usual. We just wanted to move forward and try to erase that nightmare from our minds. But of course, the entitlement ran much deeper than either of us could fathom. Lilith absolutely refused to take no for an answer when it came to her imagined gift baby from us. Within a week, Marcus's phone was bombarded with ranting voicemails and texts from his outraged parents. Apparently, Lilith had spun an entirely fictitious tale about how we had cruelly promised her a child, only to renege at the last minute out of spite. She claimed I was infertile, and using that as an excuse to keep her from experiencing the profound joys of motherhood. Her messaging made it sound like Marcus and I had some moral obligation to provide her an offspring. I wished I could say I was shocked by the bold-faced lies. But this was merely par for the delusional course with Lilith. She had grown so accustomed to her every outrageous whim being indulged by her wealthy family that she expected us to fall in line as well. The truth was irrelevant when she didn't get her way. Marcus made the ill-advised decision to actually engage with his manipulative parents over this. He tried in vain to calmly walk them through the facts that Lilith's demand was unreasonable and unethical, and her version of events was pure fiction. But his parents simply wouldn't accept it. So you're really going to deprive your poor cousin of the only chance she may ever have at motherhood? His mother wailed over the phone. After everything our family has been through and sacrificed for you both? I thought you cared about family, Marcus. His father's disdain came through like icy daggers. You're shirking your basic duty as a man and a provider. I expected more from you, son. With each conversation, Marcus grew increasingly distraught over having disappointed his family. He apologized profusely, promising to try to change my mind about cooperating with Lilith's delusional scheme. I'll admit, that stung more than a little. His sudden waffling made me question if some small part of him actually agreed that we owed his cousin a child from my own body. The turning point came when Lilith opted to go nuclear by sharing doctored images and text messages, painting me as the cruel roadblock stripping her of motherhood. She widely blasted these vicious fabrications across multiple family group chats, ensuring maximum drama. Ancient conservative aunts and uncles from across the globe weighed in, many calling for me to be disowned or shunned unless I capitulated. That opened the floodgates to an onslaught of harassment I could have never envisioned. Suddenly, my social media inboxes were bombarded with vile insults and threats from random extended family members I didn't even know. Relatives I had considered close friends defriended me, buzzing loudly about what an ungrateful, selfish monster I apparently was. The hate only mounted when I attempted to defend myself with logic and facts. A cousin in Italy essentially told me I deserved to be beaten into subservience over this. An elderly uncle bluntly asked if I was truly willing to risk bringing savage internet retribution upon myself for my defiance. It was the kind of bullying and unhinged vitriol I hoped I'd never have to endure, especially from my new family. Yet Lilith's vendetta had inspired them to break from reality entirely. In their sheltered, wealth-privileged minds, she was merely throwing a tantrum that deserved to be appeased at any cost, even if it meant treating me as subhuman property. The vicious messages triggered panic attacks and nights of insomnia for me. I began pulling away from Marcus, wondering if this was his family's true nature, all along covering for Lilith's clear mental illness with money and enabling her most abusive, unethical behavior. Were they all really just sociopathic narcissists keeping up appearances? My mental health rapidly deteriorated as the onslaught persisted. I knew I needed to take drastic action to excise these toxic people before they broke me entirely. With the ruthless family harassment campaign showing no signs of letting up, I realized I needed to take the gloves off to survive this nightmare. Lilith and her deranged enablers had forced my hand. It was time to expose their depravity for the whole world to see. First step was compiling all the vile evidence against them into an airtight case file. I gathered Lilith's inappropriate texts and pictures to Marcus, the voicemails from his parents essentially disowning us if I refused to be their broodmare, and of course, screenshots upon screenshots of the cruel insults and threats leveled at me by their extended family goon squad. With everything meticulously organized, I blasted it across every social media platform: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you name it. I made sure to tag Lilith, Marcus's parents, and every abusive relative who had come after me. The evidence log was staggering, hundreds of pieces of proof detailing the wealthy family's delusional entitlement and vitriolic hatred. I didn't hold back in the post's messaging either. I condemned their narcissistic need to bully and subjugate anyone who defied their unethical whims, their outdated beliefs that women's bodies could be treated as mere property, how their immense wealth had calcified them into mentally ill monsters. Within hours, the expose went completely viral and mainstream news outlets began reaching out. I didn't resist. In fact, I gave an anonymous interview to a major newspaper, putting the despicable family dynamics on blast to a global audience. I excoriated Lilith as a dangerously unhinged, folie à deux inspiring mentally ill woman whose family's money enabled her worst impulses instead of getting her treatment. The furious extended family wasted no time in reporting me to the police, blatantly lying that I was an unhinged harasser making false claims. But I was more than prepared, presenting law enforcement with a comprehensive evidence folder. The police quickly saw through the family's spotty fabrications, refusing to legitimize their frivolous complaint. Marcus's initial instinct was to beg me to stay silent, fearing a scorched earth exposure could imperil his job and finances. But after I showed him the barrage of hate I'd received from his own kin, he understood I had no other choice. He promised to stand by me, shaken to his core over how far his family had descended into madness. With the truth out in the open for consumption, the family's reaction only solidified how unwell and malignant they truly were. Instead of shame or self-reflection, they doubled and tripled down on their threatening rhetoric, now doing so publicly across all platforms. Lilith completely melted down, leaving a slew of racist, unhinged voicemails and texts promising revenge. When those failed to deter me, the family's aggressive tactics escalated in a terrifying manner. They attempted to leverage their wealth to destroy my career prospects and get me blacklisted from photography altogether. Marcus was fired from his job after his bosses received chilling warnings from anonymous callers. We started getting misogynistic hate mail in parcels with vaguely menacing contents. The clear implication was that if I didn't back down and retract my expose, there would be an open season declared on my life and freedom. These people were willing to go to quite literal criminal lengths to suppress me and preserve their self-delusions. At this point, Marcus agreed we had no choice but to go into hiding and begin pursuing restraining orders and other legal avenues. We had to cut ties entirely with his toxic family, a rift that still remains to this day. But I've never regretted taking that drastic stance for my safety and autonomy. The mental fallout could have been far worse had I allowed their abuse to persist. I realize now that wealth and privilege can give rise to evil qualities like entitlement, narcissistic delusion, and depravity. Lilith represented the sickest extremes of that mindset. She felt cosmically entitled to use my body for her own aims, no matter how unethical or damaging. And her family agreed. Proving money can't buy morals. My hope is that by shining a light on their darkness, I've inspired others to stand up to wealthy abusers and not get cowed. Because as my story shows, giving unrepentant narcissists an inch will only embolden them to take a devastating mile. In the end, my explosive expose achieved its intended effect of severing all ties with Marcus's malignantly narcissistic family. Though they continued to lash out with hollow legal threats and smear campaigns for a while after, we successfully obtained robust restraining orders against Lilith and her key enablers. This allowed Marcus and I to ultimately rebuild our lives in peace, far away from their toxic sphere of influence. We relocated across the country, where I was able to restart my photography career on my own terms. The mental anguish of their abuse faded with geographical and emotional distance. While Lilith's delusional baby demands were the spark, this whole trauma opened our eyes to how deeply rotten her privileged family's value system was. Even after the restraining orders, we heard murmurs of them trying to punish us further through underhanded financial manipulations and character assassinations. But we refused to be intimidated any longer. Though it took intensive counseling, Marcus finally recognized that his family's entitlement stemmed from a sickness of wealth he had been blinded to his whole life. Cutting them off, though immensely difficult at first, allowed him to break free of that twisted mindset. We'd never looked back. As for Lilith, the last update I heard from a remaining family friend was that she had become a reclusive husk of her former self, bitter that her dream child never materialized. While I pity her mental illness, I have zero regrets about denying her narcissistic delusion at every turn. My body is not her plaything.